My guest today is Peter Burton. He's a coach and a trainer, and this is his speciality. And those of you who know me know that Peter has been very influential in my own way of communicating. So, welcome, Peter. Really good to have you here on this podcast.
Thank you very much, Chris. Pleasure to be here. And hello, everybody, wherever and whenever you're listening to this.
So, talk to us a little bit about our inability or our lack of skills when it comes to facing conflicts, because right now we're coming up to Christmas, and then there's going to be families coming together, people that, press our buttons. How do we deal with that? So, authentically, without somebody said to me recently, "Oh, it's okay to say little white lies, is it?" I'm like, I'm not sure it is. So, how do we give us some tips here?
Well, yeah, before any kind of tips, I'll perhaps just dwell for a moment or two on some of the things that you said in the introduction. I mean, it's no surprise at all to me that we do have difficulty, not really just dealing with conflict, but communicating authentically. Now, that in itself is a bit of a loaded word, really, or a loaded term. Um, but we have, and I say we, I believe most people on the planet, that's quite a bold claim, isn't it, have been schooled, brought up to think in terms of right, wrong, good, bad, in terms of our words and actions and the words and actions of other people. So the judgments that we create by using that kind of thinking and the language, then it seeks to create compliance or obedience. So automatically you've got an imbalance of power between people. Now, in certain situations, that's kind of understood, the context in which we operate. But in terms of personal relationships, well, where's the equality? Where's we are the same in terms of the power that we have, and what we want to introduce is a different way of thinking and of using language and of communicating, rather than the thoughts that drive us, which usually are opinions and judgments. Then how about we look through a different lens, if you like, or a different frame of seeing ourselves and seeing other people through the language of feelings and needs, which I would believe actually are more natural, but they're almost like a forgotten language. Um,
I think you're right, because when we talk about speaking our truth, speaking authentically, quite often what we're really saying is, "I'm going to give you my honest opinion," which is
yeah.
absolutely it's a thought, and it comes from the head, and it's opinions based on past experience, what I know about you, what I, and not to do with our real feelings. So this is the shift that we have to make, isn't it, from here to here?
Well, I would always be a little careful about encouraging anybody to have to make a shift, because then what we really want to do is encourage the language and the thinking of choice. I am choosing to say this, to behave like this. Why am I choosing to behave like this and use language like this? Well, typically we've been encouraged to make ourselves right and the other person wrong, and our opinion to be the more valid one. Now, if we don't do that, then part of the challenge is to say, well, if we don't do that, what on earth do we do? Well, we connect with the feelings and needs that are alive in us at any one time. Now, part of the challenge for us is, and might sound rather kind of a patronizing thing to say. It's not meant to, because it's not meant to be, simply because it's a product of the experiences I've had working with people for decades now. We don't typically, um, we don't really have a very comprehensive or deep needs or feelings vocabulary. Um, we tend to get feelings and thoughts muddled up. We often use words that we think are feelings, which are in fact, we class them as false feelings. A word like ignored, for example, is a classic one that somebody says, "Well, you're ignoring me." We need to make a distinction. This is a sort of a key point, really, between a perception of what somebody is doing or saying to us rather than an actual feeling. So to ignore somebody, the question then would be for me, so when you tell yourself, and that's quite an important little phrase to develop, when you tell yourself that you're being ignored, what do you feel? And the language clue again, it's a little bit of, I suppose we're into the place of tips in a way right now, is the very next word after a person says, I feel, we really want a feelings word. I feel sad, I feel happy, I feel frustrated, I feel annoyed, etc. What we'll often get, if we're not careful and worth listening out for ourselves actually, is a word like that. I feel that, or I feel like. And as soon as you hear that in yourself, let alone anyone else, you know what's coming is a thought. And it might be an opinion, it might be a judgment, often a criticism. Um, and a criticism, what I've learned and what I encourage people to start thinking about, is that a criticism of oneself or another is actually an expression, a tragic expression, you could call it, of an unmet present need. But here we have part of the challenge, once again, is to find words that actually are accurate in terms of describing a need that we have. That's again part of a learning opportunity, if you like, if you want to build a bridge of understanding between yourself, myself, and others, rather than get into conflict, which then disconnects us. We want to keep a connection alive by thinking and talking in slightly different ways.
Yeah, I get that. And I recently was doing a workshop in a shadow workshop, and we got to feelings and needs. And it's really interesting that often we don't know what it is we really need. So we can, I think as women, we're very good at accessing feelings, but there's a short vocabulary of like happy, sad, angry, um,
Mm,
upset. And that's really the sum total of those feelings words. And then, well, what do you really need? What is a need? And by saying I need, am I then making myself needy? In that
yeah,
way. And it's also who meets those needs. It's like, can you kind of explain a little bit about meeting your own needs? Because too often we're expecting somebody else to meet those needs that aren't met. And
yeah,
where
but
does those
mm,
unmet needs come from originally?
yeah. Well, the needs are, I believe and have learned, and it accords with what I believe, that needs are actually an expression of life itself wanting to express itself. Um, and we get into a bit of a muddle between um, when we think of needs, we will perhaps say, "Oh, I need you to,"
Mm.
or "I need them to." Dot dot dot. Now that's not a need. That's actually a request, or can easily be heard as a demand rather than a request.
Yeah.
What's the difference? Well, you'll soon know by the response or reaction you have when you ask for someone to do something. And if they say no, you'll know that if you get cross about that, then you know really that you've actually made a demand, which is again a kind of criticism, complaint, and judgment of the other person. That if they don't do it, and here we're into something that I believe most people have learned, which is that if you don't do what I say, then there'll be a consequence to that. You will often hear that with parents and children. Um, and often it can be a sort of a veiled threat, or perhaps not even so veiled,
Mm.
um, that that some kind of punishment and sanction will arise
Mm.
out of somebody not doing what you are asking them to do, because you're not really asking them to do it, you're actually telling them to do it. And that's the difference between a demand and a request. A request has an ask,
Mm.
and if the person says no, then we can easily tell ourselves we're hurt by that refusal.
Mm.
Instead of saying, well, okay, look, am I clear about what need of mine, my present need that I'm trying to meet? Uh, and I've suggested one way to do that by asking another person to do something. If they say no, then it's like, oh, okay, I wonder whether we, and that's an important word to use, it's only a very small word, but it's an important word, can we then think of another way or more than one way to get the need met that I've identified? So the crucial bit is the feelings exist to help us understand whether we have a present need that's being met or not. In other words, if we're having feelings that we're enjoying, that will tell us that a present need we have is being met. If uh, if the opposite is true, if we're experiencing feelings that we're not enjoying, that will tell us that a present need we have is not being met. Then that gives us the opportunity to say to ourselves, or maybe in dialogue with another person or other people, look, this is what's important to me right now. Uh, I'd like this to happen. Would you be willing to do that? And then if the answer is yes, well, okay, off we go and we'll try that. And does it work? Okay, great. If it does, then my feelings will tell me, yeah, that's good. I'm feeling much more content now, or happy, or excited, or whatever was missing, if you like. If the answer is no, that hadn't worked so well, well, that's not it. You don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, if that expression makes sense to you. But what you then do is say, oh, okay, well, let's use the power of our imaginations, which are extremely powerful in human beings. What else can we come up with? What other ways of speaking? What other ways of behaving? What other strategies can we aim to use here in order to meet that need? And how does that fit with what's important to you? So we are talking about a dialogue here. We are talking about how needs language invites collaboration,
Mm.
not separation.
I like that. There's two things you said there. That question, would you be willing to dot dot dot? Because that's an open question. Would
Yeah,
you be willing to, I don't know, take the
yeah,
garbage out, whatever?
sure, sure.
So that for me is an opening to dialogue.
Yeah.
And
If I
if
can just chip in as well, there's a little extra there. If people don't like that phrase, it's like, how would it be if
yeah,
was another little phrase,
yeah,
and now we're into a bit
yeah.
of tips here, but um,
And there was something else as well, which is like if your need is not being met, it's like I'm not enjoying. what I'm not enjoying. I'm not enjoying this. So
Yeah.
then that gives the other person the opportunity to see the impact of what they're saying or doing on you. It's like, I'm not enjoying this. I'm not enjoying this. Even this, you might say, I'm not enjoying this conversation. I'm finding it, it doesn't meet my need for harmony. I really value, and that was the other thing. What is it I value? I really value harmony, and how can we together work out how that works for me? So,
Mm.
as well as you. It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah,
it's
for
all
sure.
about me, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, then um, our I would say our habit typically is if we are not getting a sense of being included in a conversation or in a plan to do something, like go to the cinema and see a particular film, or watch something on the television, or go to a concert, piece of music, anything like that socially, then we um, can be open to an accusation of being selfish, for example. Um, and that leads us into a what what typically would then be some kind of justification, or even a refusal to accept that, a rebuttal. It's like, no, I'm not, or yeah, but last time we did what you wanted to do, that kind of thing. And then we get, like, the English expression, or it's tit for tat. It's like we try and score points,
It
and
becomes a
and then
power
it becomes
struggle. Yeah.
um, some kind of uh, argument where, again, the habit that most people have been schooled in and learned is an argument has to have a winner
Mm,
and therefore a loser.
mm.
In a sort of competitive situation and environment, like a competitive sport or any kind of competition, even something like a master chef competition, or race across the world, or strictly come dancing or whatever, that is a competition, and that there is going to be ultimately one person who wins, sure. In that sense, then that's, I won't say it's not a problem, but we understand the context, the environment. When it comes to a personal relationship,
Ooh,
to behave in that way, it's an absolute disaster.
mm.
Because who is the opponent? who is the enemy, if you like to think of it
Yeah,
like that?
yeah.
Well, cracky. No, surely we're in the business of making sure that life becomes as wonderful as it can be for everybody that's involved. And that's, once you think about that phrase and hold that to the forefront of your mind, and let your heart do the speaking and your head combining, so that they're not in conflict with each other. So head and heart and body are working in harmony. And if we're in harmony, chances are we're going to communicate in ways where the intention is to create a situation that where everybody wins, if you like to
Yeah.
think of it like that. Well, everyone um, enjoys the outcome.
And nobody has to compromise. And for me, that's
Well,
the other thing. When you get
yeah,
into that situation where you're in a conflict, and you think, okay, well, yeah, I'll compromise, I'll go along, and actually that is an awful situation where you get the point of resentment, building up
it's
resentment.
yeah. Nobody wins, as the famous song from Radney Foster goes, because you give some compromise means loss to me. You give something up in the hope, and it is a hope that
yeah,
things will sort of be put back on an even keel, if I can use that kind of expression. But it is a breeding ground potentially for resentment, without a shadow of a doubt.
yeah.
Yeah, um, and a grudging acceptance. You know, when I say those words now, I can feel in my body that there's a discomfort, there's
There's a
some
lot,
kind of
actually.
irritability,
Yeah.
it,
Well,
even
actually,
even
you
even
lose. Mhm.
even a sour
Everybody
taste in the mouth.
loses.
Yeah,
Everybody loses actually with a compromise because
yeah,
the person who's compromised has lost, I think, lost some of their own personal power, and the person who is expecting a compromise really will have lost eventually because resentment will show up somewhere.
mm,
And
yeah,
so
for sure.
it separates.
Yeah,
It doesn't, it's
yeah,
not collaborative. What I'm hearing you say is that when we talk from our feelings and our needs, what's important to us, what we enjoy, what we value,
yeah,
and we collaborate over that. We use our hearts to say, this is what we need, this is what is important to me, this is what I value, and our heads to create a solution for both of us, our imagination to find
yeah.
a way through this that works for everybody.
That's exactly it.
Mm.
Yeah, and that may seem, if you're hearing that for the first time, you might think, well, you know, that's that's idealistic. You know, that's all well and good, but you know, in the hard realities of life, um, blah blah blah. Well, yeah, okay. There is some kind of, quite understandably, typically there's some resistance to this, partly because it's unfamiliar for most, and we do like, as humans, we like, our brains, in fact, like what is familiar, what is well known, um, and anything that is unfamiliar, we have maybe some doubt or skepticism or etc. But it, for me, it's just raising a question about um, our motivation, if you like. What what do we want to do differently if we choose to believe that there will be a better outcome of our way of communicating with each other? And that isn't just actually in a personal relationship. It is true um, in workplaces as well. Of course, it works in, but it's just an, as I said already, it's just an unfamiliar way of communicating. But I choose to believe it's become um, the 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 judgmental, moralistic judgments have become what we believe to be normal. But I don't, and that's true. They have become normal, but I don't think they're natural actually. And there is that distinction that I think it's important to make. And
Mm.
if it leads to, uh, even if it's not a personal relationship, if it creates greater understanding with less friction, shall we say, then what's not to like?
Exactly, exactly. And I'm kind of with that, you know, if you were to go into your office on Monday morning and you come up against somebody who's really pushed your buttons, it's not going to be useful to stand there and say, well, you know, I'm feeling very hurt right now because you're speaking to me in this way, and what I really need is blah blah blah. It's not going to work. But what's really important, I think, is to do that for yourself. You know, you talk about self empathy, and I believe that is the key because yes, we want to make life more wonderful for everybody, but it actually starts here. You know, peace begins within each and every one of us. And if we can use this way of being for ourselves first and foremost, I think that's a really important thing because, like you say, for some people they might say this is all, la la land and fantasy. Actually, it really works, but it has to start with you, not try and make it work with other people straight away
Oh,
until
sure.
you've really
Yeah.
got this habit, let's say, of saying, this is what I'm feeling. I'm not enjoying this, but this is my feeling right now. What am I feeling? What am I telling myself? What is the thoughts going on
Mm.
in my head? And what do I really need? What does my heart really long for here? And what can I do with my imagination to meet that need?
Mm.
So you might want to speak a little bit about that because I think that's really important.
Well, I think the important thing is when, and this will be true for me anyway, for any learning actually, to set the bar very low in terms of what you're aiming to do, and certainly I would not advocate using this in a, what should we call it, a high pressure situation with somebody who I find, I have found it probably the hardest uh, experience to put this into any kind of practice, certainly early days, is people that you are closest to.
Mm.
I would always, as you've said already, I would get curious, and that's an important word to use here, curious rather than critical.
Or
Um,
furious. Curious, not
Curious,
furious.
curious, yeah, for sure. Just to start being curious and wonder if you, in a quiet moment, think back to something earlier in the day or earlier in the week, something that really irritated you or frustrated you or whatever. You can do a little personal, either internally thinking, or you can write down what got to me here. What was the situation? What was I feeling? What was I needing that I wasn't getting? Because presumably, if you get frustrated or irritated or upset, then a present need of yours at that time was not being met.
Mm.
So it would be just kind of explore and get curious and either think to yourself or write it down. Yeah, what was going on for me there? What need of mine was not being met? How come I got cross? Well, you got your frustrations, so that would tell you straight away that there's a need that you had which was not being met at that time. Was it a need for respect, for example, because someone was talking to you in a certain way? Um, were you telling yourself that you were being ignored, which you're quite upset about because you had a need for kind of involvement or inclusion in something, and it was a bit like you were telling yourself you're being left out of a conversation, something like that. So that's where the practice comes. I mean, if you're on a train, or bus or whatever, you could just do that little bit of curious wondering and think back also then, not to a situation that was unpleasant, but you could think, oh yeah, I had a really good time or I had a really good conversation with X, blah blah, um, the other day. What was going on there that I enjoyed? I clearly enjoyed it, so I kind of had a, when I think about it now, I have a kind of warm feeling in my body about that. So what need of mine was being met then? Well, that need for connection, that need for shared kind of enjoyment, laughter, yeah, just so those kind of things are little bits of practice that you can do internally without having to speak anything out loud to anyone else. And if somebody did accost you in the way you described on a Monday morning in a workplace, you might just want to get curious about what need of theirs isn't being met. You might not even want to say anything, but just the very consideration there, rather than biting back or reacting, pausing, I think, is a really important. It sounds a bit weird to call it a skill, but I think it's a really good attitude to have, to not do what you might typically do by habit. When somebody says or does something you don't like, you might want to react straight away to that. Well, maybe just pause a little bit and think to yourself without saying anything. Yeah, what's going on in me? What's starting to be alive in me? Feelings, thoughts, bodily sensations, and take a bit of time later perhaps to process it rather than in the moment.
Yeah. And so I like that too, that, if somebody is upset or angry and taking it out on you, it's like,
Sure.
okay,
Yeah.
I wonder, without even saying anything, just wondering what might be going on in them,
Yeah. Yeah.
what need of theirs isn't being met. Not that it's your
Exactly.
responsibility to meet it, but
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
in that, you're not taking the bait, you're not joining in the drama.
No.
So you can even just let it wash over you, thinking to yourself, something must have triggered them for
Yeah.
this. And of course, it could be me. It could be me.
Well, it could be something I've said or done, or not
Yeah,
said and done, or
yeah,
done,
yeah,
for sure. But even to have that attitude of curiosity and wondering means that it's a bit like uh, we're not going to go into a script, especially if it's someone that we have a relationship with, whether a working one or a personal one. We're not going to do that. It's a bit like having Velcro that doesn't stick
yeah,
anymore.
yeah,
So if I change, we might want, of course, the other person to change, but we could be waiting a very long time for that. What we can do, of course, is where we have true power is in our own approach and our own attitude and our own behavior. And if we can affect that, even by almost like change begins with one sentence spoken differently,
mm,
and or even one thought that's spoken internally differently, that starts the process of change. And therefore the the next line of the script, if you like to think of it like that, it can't happen because I'm not engaged in
yeah,
the typical drama, let's
yeah,
call it, or the typical conversation, even if we don't like the word drama. Uh, the a conversation that we've had, we might even start to number them because they're so familiar. Are we
exactly.
going to really have conversation number four again for the 25th time?
Well,
But,
yeah, it's like a code, isn't it? You know where it's going to go. You might just as well not have the conversation, just say code for,
yeah,
be done with
yeah, yeah.
it.
And
Yeah,
yeah, I've always been saddened by the expression. I remember not me using it, but someone using it and say, "Oh well, let's agree to differ, or let's agree to disagree, as it were." And that to me is I feel sad about that because that
mm,
that seems to suggest that
yes,
there wasn't enough effort put into creating ideas for
building the
meeting
bridge.
the needs
Mm,
of everybody involved. It's almost like, no, we kind of gave up, or the person I'm thinking about in the past, kind of gave up and didn't want to pursue it, uh, instead of keeping going and trying to find something that would have worked, I believe,
yeah,
for us
yes,
both or us all.
yeah,
Um, so
exactly.
yeah,
We're coming towards the end of this podcast, Pete, but what I wanted to mention is that you've just talked about communicating for a change, how we
yeah,
can change something to create a whole different way of being and a whole different outcome than just going into an argument or
Yeah.
separation or disconnection or polarization, which is what we do, right? Even with that agree to disagree, there's no connection. That is, the bridge has not been built between
No, that's
people.
right.
So um,
Mm.
I feel like, yeah, coming to the end of this podcast, it's like this is your work, of course, in the world. This is what you do really well. I've learned so much from you over the years, in my own way. And you'll be doing an online Communicating for a Change workshop on February the 1st, yes?
That's right. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, we'll have a few uh, hours together in order to explore this further. Um, I'm hoping that some of what we've talked about today has interested or maybe even intrigued people about how this might have a beneficial impact, which is the aim, of course, to build these. I use that expression quite a lot, that build the bridges of understanding between us. Uh, but first of all, as you said already, Chris, it's about understanding ourselves and what moves us to speak or act in a particular way or behave in a particular way, um, and to do it in a more conscious way without being kind of uh, overly thoughtful about it, but just to have a different way of, what shall I call it really? It, yes, of course, a different way of speaking, a different way of thinking, um, but it's like almost a different way of um, us describing or labeling our words and actions. Our, typically, as we've said already, we typically evaluate words and actions in the language of good, bad, right, wrong, etc. And what I'm suggesting and would love to develop further on the 1st of February between 11 and 4 is, if we're not evaluating words and actions in that way, how do we evaluate words and actions answer through the language of feelings and needs? Okay, looking at ourselves and others through a different set of lenses, if you like to think of it like that. So that will be very much an offer, and I'd really, really like the opportunity to uh, explore this further, to help people who might be interested in the prospect of learning some of this, not just the concepts, but the actual practice that there will be, you know, to reframe phrases and expressions that we have got used to using or used to hearing from others, and how do we shift that? How do we change that? And as I've said already, change begins with just one sentence, either thought of or spoken differently.
Yes.
So
Great.
that will be an offer. Sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. And I really appreciate your time today. And yeah, I look forward to hosting you on February the 1st, 11 o'clock.
Yeah.
And there will be opportunities on Eventbrite to join that workshop. So in the meantime, just like to say a big thank you for your wisdom today.
Okay. Thanks very much for the opportunity. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, thank you. Bye.